Hello and welcome back to Foreign Correspondents. I'm Tommy Sorang, and joining me here in the studio today is our panel of foreign journalists. Welcome on board.
Hello.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks.
There's been a flurry of new activity in the diplomatic chess game surrounding the Korean Peninsula, rekindling hopes that the stalled nuclear talks between Pyeongyang and Washington could be rejuvenated. So on this week's edition of Foreign Correspondents, we take a closer look at this whole Washington and Pyongyang-Washington meetings to get a forecast on Peninsula affairs moving forward. U.S. President Donald Trump flew over to South Korea after attending the G20 Summit in Osaka to hold his 8th summit with South Korean President Moon Jae-in on June 30th. So what's your overall assessment of the Moon-Trump summit?
We actually don't really know what has happened yet. I read Trump's statement to the press, and it seems like the meeting was mostly about setting up this handshake at the DMZ. Trump alluded to, resolving some trade issues with South Korea, but we have yet to see what exactly those are. But I would say it's a successful summit for Moon, at least, because he really did need some kind of momentum going forward on inter-Korean relations, and that meeting ultimately kind of made it seem like there are things going on with North Korea again.
Right. And Frank, what's your take?
Just to reiterate what Kelly said about Moon's sort of role as being a peacemaker between the U.S. and North Korea, I think that was the most important part of the summit, definitely arranging that meeting that took place at the DMZ. South Korea has been trying to get the U.S. and North Korea back to the negotiating table on the denuclearization sanctions relief process for some time, especially since the failed summit in Hanoi. And so securing that meeting at the DMZ really was a key aspect of the summit. And I think the summit, for the U.S. president to come to South Korea, I think that was really kind of payback for his summit with Japan. Japanese leader Abe playing golf with the president probably rubbed South Korea a little bit the wrong way. And I think this trip coming to South Korea from the G20 was really an easy way for him to say, hey, we care about South Korea as well.
All right.
Yeah, I agree with you too. I think it's good news for Moon Jae-in. I think thanks to his role as a mediator and thanks to what happened, this summit between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, I have a good hope that the nuclear talks are back on track. So all of this is quite good news.
Quite good news. Now, by far the most interesting item on Trump's itinerary during his visit in South Korea was his trip to the Demilitarized Zone on the inter-Korean border. By heading to the DMZ, Trump became the 5th U.S. president to ever do so. Right after the South Korea-U.S. summit, President Moon Jae-in announced that Trump would be heading north towards the border village of Panmunjeom on the DMZ to meet North Korean leader Kim Jong-un.
정전 선언이 있은 후 66년 만에 판문점에서 미국과 북한이 만납니다.
And after his arrival at Panmunjeom, President Trump crossed the Military Demarcation Line that had separated the two Koreas since the signing of an armistice 66 years ago.
오랜 적대적 관계였던 우리 두 나라가 이렇게 여기서 평화의 악수를 하는 것 자체가 어제와 달라진 언음을 표현하는 것이고 앞으로 우리가 하는 행동에 긍정적인 영향을 미칠 수 있다고 생각했습니다.
I really think that if you go back 2.5 years and you look at what was going on prior to my becoming president, it was a very, very bad situation, a very dangerous situation for South Korea, for North Korea, for the world. And I think the relationship that we've developed has meant so much to so many people.
How surprised were you, or were you surprised at all by the impromptu meeting between Trump and Kim?
I mean, like everybody, there was I didn't really believe the speculation a week ago when people started to talk about it, but when I saw the tweet on, when was it, on the Saturday morning.
That Trump sent out?
The invitation that Trump sent to Kim Jong-un by tweet, hey, why don't we have this handshake and just say hi. I was, oh my God, he will say yes, and I will have to work all the weekend. But yeah, usually they don't answer so fast, but that they answer very fast, saying, oh yeah, that's very interesting, but please send us a formal invitation. And that was a North Korean for yes, and I knew it would happen.
어떤 사람들은 일부에서는 뭐 대통령께서 보내신 친서를 내가 보면서 미리 사전에 합의된 만남이 아닌가 이런 말들도 하던데 사실 난 어제 아침에 대통령께서 그런 의향을 표시하신 걸 보고 나 역시 깜짝 놀랐고 정식으로 오늘 여기서 만날 걸 제안하시는 말씀을 오후 늦은 시간에야 이렇게 알게 됐습니다.
And I want to thank Chairman Kim for something else. When I put out the social media notification, if he didn't show up, the press was going to make me look very bad. So you made us both look good, and I appreciate it.
Yes, you know, I think going back, I remember us talking about the Singapore summit and whether that was going to happen, and my comments then were that it was irresistible. That the two leaders would want to gather the spotlight for themselves, and this was a golden opportunity for them to do so. And from the time it was floated to, of course, the Saturday morning, as Fred mentioned, I felt it was 100% on that they would have that meeting. What really surprised me about the meeting, though, was that they sat together and had a discussion for 50 minutes. That was key. That was a lot longer than what had been anticipated.
Right,
a lot of people thought they would just shake hands, say a few words at the border, and that was it. But for Kim Jong-un to come to the South Korean side, to sit down in a room in Freedom House and talk to the American leader for an hour there, I thought was very important, particularly considering what had happened for the past several months since the failed summit in Hanoi, and it has succeeded in moving us onto another track. They've developed now some working groups that are going to continue, or I should say renew, negotiations on denuclearization and sanctions relief.
Many have criticized the meeting between Kim and Trump as a mere PR stunt. Do you think this meeting has yielded any tangible outcome?
I mean, yes. First, that meeting itself is significant.
Sure.
They met at the DMZ. In terms of trust building, this is really important. Second, you mentioned that Donald Trump announced it, like the negotiator between the two countries will restart negotiation within 2 or 3 weeks. That means that North Korea probably agreed to at least discuss some technical level of denuclearization, though that is itself very positive things too.
Yeah, I totally agree with Fred. What you had previous to this was North Korea warning the U.S. that if they don't come to the negotiating table with a different attitude, they have until the end of the year. And you had that those short-range missile launches that North Korea did. So we did see the potential for an escalation of tension between the U.S. and North Korea prior to this meeting. That's been deflated with this.
Right.
And again, as Fred pointed out, there are going to be working groups meeting to discuss the issues of denuclearization and sanctions relief. So definitely there are some positives to take away from this.
Now, Frank, you mentioned events that occurred in the run-up to this summit, so let's focus on that. In the run-up to their meeting, there had been signs that frosty Pyongyang-Washington ties could be on the mend, with the two leaders resuming personal exchanges with each other.
트럼프 대통령의 정치적 판단 능력과 남다른 용기에 사의를 표한다고 하시면서 흥미로운 내용을 심중히 생각해 볼 것이라고.
He actually sent me birthday wishes, but it was just a very friendly letter both ways. We have a very good relationship.
Then on June 27th, on the eve of the South Korea-U.S. summit, North Korea's foreign ministry released a rather strongly worded sentiment, a statement that condemned both South Korea and the U.S., dashing hopes of a resumption in dialogue between Pyongyang and Washington. Kelly, what's your take on these mixed messages that were sent out by North Korea, where they resumed exchanges with Donald Trump, but at the same time condemned South Korea and the U.S.?
You know, I think at the end of the day, they were just trying to show that there is some good faith and goodwill to negotiate with the United States and meet with the United States. But obviously, North Korea wasn't too happy after the Vietnam summit. I also think North Korea has been pressuring the U.S. a little bit by meeting with China and Russia as well. So I think this is all a part of their master plan. I think that they think, you know, that the path forward is with Donald Trump exclusively. And so Kim Jong-un wants to maintain some kind of personal level positive relationship with Trump, while also, condemning greater aspects of the U.S. and South Korea. And, I think moving forward, this is also going to be true. It's really great that, they're meeting again, hopefully, in the future. But inherently, this is all going to boil down to whether or not the U.S. wants to budge at all with any concessions that North Korea wants, and vice versa. So, I think this trend will continue down the line.
Well, just to expand on what Kelly said about that personal relationship, North Korea, as she mentioned, really wants that direct line between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump. And I think it's a reality that the solution to this problem has to be ironed out between North Korea and the U.S.
Yeah, something as well I'm wondering, and I read some reports about it. I mean, I think there is some kind of internal disagreement within the North Korean leadership itself. It seems that Kim Jong-un probably has to fight against some conservative who does not want this diplomacy right now in the U.S. And that might explain some of the very strong article we could read in the Nodong Shinmun, the North Korean official newspaper, recently. I mean, it's always very difficult to know what's happening in Pyongyang, but that's probably something that we should take into account as well.
Okay, now let's go back to the U.S. We were talking about the Democratic debate. Prior to the Pyongyang-Washington Summit on June 19th, President Trump officially launched his re-election bid for the 2020 U.S. presidential election.
With every ounce of heart and might and sweat and soul, we're going to keep making America great again, and then we will indeed keep America great.
Media pundits and experts have expressed different views on how President Trump might handle North Korea affairs as he vies for a second term in the Oval Office. Do you think North Korea-related issues are a high priority for Trump as he vies for that second term at the Oval Office?
Well, I don't think that they can play really that huge a role.
Because?
The status quo that's going on now is probably a good thing for him. But if North Korea were to engage in some nuclear testing or some long-range missile testing, the U.S. would react to that, and he would get a bump in terms of the war president's support. I don't see that happening. I hope that that doesn't happen, but that would be a way that this would have a greater influence. If things just stay sort of relatively quiet, as now, negotiations going on slowly, which I think is probably the most likely scenario, then the North Korean issue is not likely to play a large role in the U.S. election. What they'll be looking for more likely is the economy and perhaps trade issues with China.
Fred, do you think Trump securing that second term in office will be good news for the two Koreas?
Actually, as much I dislike Trump for all of his policy and his personality and his climate change position, I do think he represents a good opportunity for Korean peace. So maybe, yes, from a purely Korean point of view, his re-election might be a good thing because it might allow the process to continue. We might hope some kind of actual denuclearization step being taken by North Korea.
I agree with Fred. I mean, a regime change in the U.S. would certainly, I think, start us back from, step one. And it's interesting because I did some street interviews in South Korea last week, and I heard from a lot of Koreans, South Koreans, that they're not really interested in this summit because from their point of view, Trump's going to be booted out of office and it's going to be all over, which I thought, was interesting. I don't know if Trump will be reelected or not, but I do think that that is the general impression that this is a Kim Jong-un Trump relationship, and that, of course, the way that the U.S. Congress is, largely for sanctions and against, greater cooperation with North Korea. I do think that, if we do have a Democrat candidate, there's a good chance that this is all wiped and we have a clean slate to start with.
I think that's really one of the unfortunate examples of the politicization of U.S. foreign policy. Right now you see the critics of Donald Trump saying he's doing everything wrong, everything bad, you know, and Donald Trump is doing anything but Obama. Whereas if it was Obama that was opening up dialogue with North Korea, they would be praising Trump for diffusing the tension on the Korean Peninsula, which is really what he's done here. Instead, you have Democrats in the U.S. saying he's doing a horrible job, he's kowtowing to a dictator, and this type of thing. When in fact, you know, if we look at it more from a liberal perspective, his foreign policy toward North Korea is more in keeping with the Democratic Party values than, you know, a more hardline policy.
So Kelly, how high are Trump's chances of getting that second term in office in the eyes of the media and also the general public in the U.S.?
You know, I'm a little hesitant to make a prediction, but I do think that there is a solid chance that President Trump could be reelected. Right now, you know, there's a lot of domestic issues in the United States that would, you know, paint Trump in a very negative light. Like, you know, we have children in detention camps who are getting sick, you know, heat stroke, dying. We have major border issues at large, climate change issues, et cetera. And even so, Trump has about a 45% approval rating as of late June, and that's an average between 10-some polls. So I do think that, you know, there's a good faction of the American public that is for Trump. And, you know, if he keeps playing up, you know, this kind of diplomacy with North Korea and makes it look successful, I think a lot of conservatives are going to be for him. And I do think that, you know, if he is reelected, you know, this relationship will continue, but of course at the expense of other things.
All right, let's now come back to Korea and what happened over the weekend. Following the South Korea-U.S. Summit and the historic three-way meeting at the DMZ, there's hope that President Moon Jae-in's peace drive on the Korean Peninsula could once again gain traction.
문 대통령은 시 주석과 김정은 위원장과의 회담, 북미 친서 교환 등은 북미 대화의 모멘텀을 높였다고 생각한다며 북미 간 조속한 대화가 이루어지길 희망한다고 말했습니다.
미국과 한국은 언제든지 대화할 어떤 자세가 되어 있다라는 것을 공개적으로 표명했습니다. 그 시기를 이렇게 결정하는 것은 결국 김정은 위원장이 언제 호응하느냐에 달려 있다고 할 수 있습니다. 저는 북미 간 또 남북 간의 대화가 너무 늦지 않게 재개되기를 바랍니다. 많은 시간이 걸릴 수 있을 것이며 또 인내 있는 그런 대화가 필요하다고 생각합니다.
Chairman Kim Jong-un held one-on-one discussions with President Trump, and President Moon lauded his American counterpart, calling him the peacemaker on the Korean Peninsula.
트럼프 대통령님이야말로 한반도 평화 프로세스의 주인공, 한반도의 피스메이커입니다. 오늘 김정은 국무위원장과의 판문점 상봉이 남과 북 국민 모두에게 희망이 되고 평화를 향한 인류 역사의 이정표가 되길 바랍니다.
So in this latest round, we saw this whole Washington summit and Pyeongyang Washington summit. When do you think we might see an inter-Korean summit?
That sounds tricky. I wish North Korea understood how useful it could be for them to have a better relationship with South Korea. But so far, according to what we can read in the official press, they really want to shun South Korea and to put South Korea aside. And I think it's a mistake. But in the near future, I'm pretty pessimistic about a new inter-Korean summit.
Oh, okay. Do you also share that pessimism?
Moon Jae-in has previously said that he wants to see those negotiations happen between the U.S. and North Korea. In order for relations between South Korea and North Korea to improve, and this is from North Korea as well, those relations between Washington and Pyongyang need to improve. They can't have an antagonistic relationship between those two capitals and expect inter-Korean relations to develop. I'm sure Moon Jae-in was perfectly happy to see Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump walk into that room to have their own private discussion without him, and felt, you know, better in terms of the potential for peace on the Korean Peninsula because of that. If that means that there's not going to be an inter-Korean summit for another, you know, 3 months or 6 months, I'm sure that's fine with the South Korean leader.
Let's now shift our focus away from the two Koreas meetings with Donald Trump and back to the G20. Just prior to the South Korea-U.S. summit and the two leaders meeting with Kim Jong-un, the G20 Summit of world leaders took place in Osaka, Japan. Questions over North Korea's denuclearization and the U.S.-China trade war took center stage at the G20 gathering. Presidents Donald Trump and Xi Jinping met for the first time in 7 months at the G20 summit and agreed to resume trade talks while calling for a ceasefire on their trade spat.
中美关系发展的根本性问题，交换意见，也是为下一阶段两国关系发展定向把舵，推进以协调合作、稳定为基调的。
And I will say that I think this can be a very productive meeting, and I think we can go on to do something that truly will be monumental and great for both countries, and that's what I look forward to doing.
What's your overall assessment of the meeting between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump?
I mean, at least they agreed on this truth, this ceasefire, which is a good thing. In the French press, the assessment of the meeting was not so great. They said, like, okay, it's a respite in the trade war, but they didn't find an agreement. And to some observers, it looked like what happened in the previous G20 in Argentina, where it was more or less the same thing. Like they met, they agreed to a truth in the trade war, but it still continued after. So I'm not too sure what will be the long-term impact. We still have to see.
The leaders of South Korea and Japan, however, did not meet. Many experts have attributed this to Tokyo's dissatisfaction over recent court rulings regarding forced Korean laborers during the Japanese colonial era.
일본 정치 지도자들이 자꾸 이제 그 문제를 국내 정치적인 문제로 자꾸 이렇게 이제 다루기 때문에 이 과거세 문제가 우리의 이제 지향적인 발전에 발목을 잡는 일이 거듭되고 있다고 생각합니다.
So what's your take?
I mean, it goes back to the end of World War II and the different responses that came out of Germany and came out of Japan, and South Korea's reaction to that. From that point on, is going to be the same. It's going to be an antagonistic relationship with Japan. There's the expression that time heals all wounds. This wound is going to take a long time to heal.
Right. All right, moving on to China. On June 20th and 21st, Chinese President Xi Jinping visited North Korea and held a summit meeting with Kim Jong-un. Xi's visit marked the first visit to North Korea by a Chinese leader in 14 years. President Xi and Chairman Kim reportedly discussed North Korean denuclearization, negotiations with the U.S., and Pyongyang-Beijing ties. President Jae-in also met President Xi on the sidelines of the G20 Summit in Osaka and talked to him for a considerable length of time, around 40 minutes. Do you think China will now play an even greater role in Korean Peninsula affairs?
I think it's a possibility. As Trump said, sanctions are on, I'm in no rush. And I think North Korea, at least, is very much strategizing as a reaction to that, right? So, after the failed Vietnam summit, North Korea met with China and Russia. I think that was politically to send a message that, it can get cozier with U.S. adversaries. But I also think North Korea is just trying to sustain itself and build kind of this economic network with alternative countries that don't necessarily get along with the U.S. So as a survival strategy, as long as these sanctions are going, I think North Korea has no incentive not to involve China and in its affairs, as well as by default inter-Korean affairs. As things continue to escalate or de-escalate between the U.S. and China, that's going to have an effect on this as well. So I think the Chinese leader is here to stay when it comes to Korean peace issues, and we'll just have to see how it plays out.
Final question. From the Pyongyang-Beijing summit on June 20th to the surprise Kim-Trump summit on June 30th, there has been a jam-packed schedule of high-level meetings. So in the backdrop of all this, how would you forecast the direction of Korean Peninsula affairs in the second half of this year as a news headline?
Okay.
Since you are a journalist.
I will let my inner Star Wars fan speak, and I would say like nuclearization talks, a new hope, question mark.
Nuclearization talks, a new hope.
More talking, not more testing.
All right.
Those are both very good headlines. I agree. I think for me, it would be a headline along the lines of, will the U.S. make concessions, ? Because I think that is the big question here in terms of just logistical negotiating.
All right, very interesting headlines. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to be here, thanks.
The Korean Peninsula is back in the global limelight once again, following a string of high-profile developments on the diplomatic front. In particular, there's a lot of hope riding on future improvements to Pyeongyang-Washington ties following the historic meeting between President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. We hope this renewed air of reconciliation and dialogue will lead to more fruitful discussions for permanent peace in the region. That's all we have for this week. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye.